The air was tense as the Marauder fleet descended from the heavens, blotting out the midday sun over New York City. The sky, once clear and blue, now swirled with thick, dark clouds that rumbled ominously. The towering alien ships cast long shadows across the streets, their sleek, metallic surfaces gleaming in the dim light. Captain Sarah Mitchell crouched behind an overturned car, her eyes fixed on the enemy. She could feel the cold metal of her shotgun pressed against her shoulder, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. "Stay sharp," she whispered into her calm, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the Marauder engines. Her team of resistance fighters, scattered in hidden positions throughout the urban jungle, responded with a series of clicks, each one a quiet affirmation of their readiness. A booming voice echoed through the city, projected from the largest ship hovering above. "Inhabitants of Earth," it declared, "you face the might of the Galactic Marauders. Surrender now, and your lives will be spared. Resist, and you will be destroyed." The arrogance in the tone was unmistakable. They had no idea what they were walking into. "Do they really think we're just gonna roll over?" muttered Jackson, a burly ex-Marine who had joined Sarah's unit a few months prior. He gripped his shotgun tightly, a fierce determination in his eyes. Sarah smirked. "Let them think what they want. It'll make this easier." She glanced around at her team: Jackson, who had seen too much war but still had fight left in him; Elena, the engineer with a knack for turning junk into weapons; and Marcus, the quiet sniper who never missed. Each one of them had a reason to be here, a reason to fight, and they all knew what was at stake. The Marauders began their descent, landing in perfect formation on the wide avenue below. Their armor, sleek and reflective, shimmered with a faint blue glow, their infamous energy shields, believed to be impenetrable by most conventional weapons. They advanced with mechanical precision, their movements synchronized like a well-oiled machine. Sarah's heart pounded as she waited for the signal. She knew their plan hinged on the element of surprise. The Marauders were expecting easy prey, not a coordinated ambush in the middle of an urban battlefield. She steadied her breath, focusing on the rhythm of the countdown in her head. 3, 2, 1. "Now!" she shouted, and all hell broke loose. Her team emerged from their hiding spots, shotguns blazing. The first wave of buckshot ricocheted off the pavement, pelting the Marauders at close range. The aliens stumbled, their shields flickering with an eerie blue light as they absorbed the impact. But this was just the beginning. "Hit 'em hard!" Jackson yelled, firing his shotgun with a ferocity that shook the air. The specialized rounds, packed with tungsten and depleted uranium, slammed into the Marauder shields, penetrating the energy barrier with a crackling burst of light. Several Marauders fell, their armor pierced, their bodies crumpling to the ground in a heap of metallic limbs. "What the hell?" Sarah heard one of the Marauder commanders shout through the chaos. "Their weapons, how are they?" His words were cut short by another blast from Marcus's shotgun, a direct hit to the chest. The Marauders were disoriented, struggling to comprehend how Earth's seemingly primitive weaponry could breach their defenses. They began to fire back, their energy weapons lighting up the street with blinding bolts of plasma. But Sarah's team was quick, darting between cover, always one step ahead. "Elena, status on the drones?" Sarah called out, ducking behind a dumpster as a plasma bolt sizzled past her head. "Working on it," Elena shouted back, her fingers flying over a portable terminal. "Just a few more seconds, and got it!" She hit a final key, and a swarm of small drones dropped from the rooftops, buzzing like angry wasps. They dived towards the Marauders, releasing EMP pulses that short-circuited their energy shields. "Nice work!" Sarah grinned, taking advantage of the opening. "Push forward! Don't let them regroup!" Her team advanced with a renewed surge of energy, pressing the attack. The Marauders, now without their shields, were exposed, vulnerable to the unrelenting hail of shotgun pellets. They tried to fall back, but Sarah's team was relentless, their tactics brutal and efficient. For a moment, it seemed as though they might have won. But then, from the shadows of a nearby alley, a Marauder soldier managed to pull himself up and activate a distress signal. A low hum filled the air as reinforcements began to descend from the sky, their dark shapes blotting out the remaining light. "Fall back!" Sarah ordered, her voice urgent. "We need to regroup." She fired off one last shot before retreating into the maze of alleys, her team close behind. As they dashed through the narrow streets, Sarah's mind raced. They had caught the Marauders off guard, but the battle was far from over. They would be back, and in greater numbers. And next time, they wouldn't underestimate Earth so easily. She glanced over her shoulder at her team, each member hardened but unbroken. They were all she had, and she would fight to the last breath to protect them, and her home. "Good work today," she said quietly as they ducked into a hidden bunker, catching their breath. "But this is just the beginning. We've got a long fight ahead of us." Jackson nodded, reloading his shotgun with a grim smile. "Let them come. We're ready for them." Sarah nodded, steeling herself for the battles to come. "We'll make them regret ever setting foot on our planet." Outside, the sky darkened further, the Marauders' ships hovering ominously. But beneath the shadows, there was a flicker of defiance, a spark that refused to be extinguished. The night pressed in around them, heavy with tension and the acrid scent of burned ozone. Sarah could feel the weight of her rifle against her chest, the strap biting into her shoulder, as she adjusted her position. The bunker was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of emergency lights casting long shadows across the concrete walls. Her team sat in a circle, weapons within reach, their faces drawn but determined. "We held them off once, but we won't get that lucky again," Sarah said, her voice low but steady. She glanced at each of them, reading the exhaustion in their eyes. "They're going to come back, and when they do, they'll be ready." Jackson was the first to break the silence. "So, what's the plan, Cap?" His voice was gruff, but there was an edge of anticipation there, a readiness to face whatever came next. "We adapt," Sarah replied. "They're learning, but so are we. We've got the upper hand in this terrain. They don't know these streets like we do." Elena leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice tinged with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Their shields, when they recalibrate, there's a momentary drop in power. If we can time it right, we could exploit that window." Sarah nodded. "Good catch. We'll need to be quick, though. We can't afford any mistakes." Marcus, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke up. "I can set up in the old clock tower," he suggested, his tone measured and calm. "I'll have a clear line of sight from there. If they try to flank us again, I can pick them off before they get close." Sarah met his gaze and gave a slight nod of approval. "Do it. We'll need every advantage we can get." She looked around at her team, her expression hardening. "Remember, this isn't just about survival. It's about sending a message. We're not going down without a fight." The plan was set. They would lure the Marauders deeper into the city, into the narrow alleys and tight corners where their numbers would count for less, and their technology wouldn't save them. It was a dangerous gambit, but it was all they had. The team moved out under the cover of darkness, navigating the maze-like streets with practiced ease. The city was eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of alien machinery and the soft crunch of rubble underfoot. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every corner a potential ambush. As they neared their positions, Sarah's mind raced through the details of their strategy. They would use hit-and-run tactics, striking hard and fast, then disappearing before the Marauders could mount a counterattack. It was risky, but it played to their strengths: mobility, surprise, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. They reached the edge of the ambush zone, and Sarah signaled for the team to halt. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Remember, stay low, stay quiet, and wait for my signal. We move as one." Jackson gave her a thumbs up, his face set in a grim smile. "Let's give them hell." The Marauders appeared minutes later, their heavy footsteps echoing off the walls of the narrow street. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she watched them advance, their movements cautious but purposeful. She could see the faint glow of their recalibrated shields, a reminder of the challenge they faced. She waited until they were deep within the kill zone before giving the signal. Now! She hissed into her comm, and the street erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. Elena's improvised explosives went off with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave through the narrow passage. Chunks of debris flew into the air, and the Marauders staggered, momentarily blinded by the blast. Marcus's rifle cracked from the clock tower, picking off targets with lethal precision. The Marauders tried to regroup, their commanders barking orders in a language that sounded like grinding metal. But the humans pressed their advantage, moving swiftly and unpredictably, striking from multiple directions at once. Jackson barreled out of a side alley, his shotgun booming in the confined space, the blast tearing through alien armor. Sarah moved like a shadow, her movements fluid and deliberate. She fired a series of shots, each one carefully aimed, each one finding its mark. Her heart raced, but her mind was clear, focused. She could see the confusion and frustration on the Marauders' faces as their shields flickered and failed. But then, a new sound filled the air, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the sound of reinforcements arriving. "Fall back!" she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Regroup at the fallback point." The team moved swiftly, disengaging from the fight and retreating down a side street. The Marauders were hot on their heels, their reinforcements closing in fast. Sarah knew they couldn't outrun them for long. They needed another plan, and fast. They ducked into an abandoned building, the heavy wooden door slamming shut behind them. Sarah leaned against the wall, breathing hard, her mind racing. "We're gonna have to hold them here," she said, glancing around at her team. "Elena, can you rig the door with explosives?" Elena nodded, already pulling out a handful of makeshift charges. "On it. But it's not going to hold them for long." "It doesn't need to," Sarah replied. "Just long enough." As Elena worked, Sarah turned to Jackson and Marcus. "We'll set up a crossfire," she instructed. "Jackson, you take the stairs. Marcus, you cover the windows. We'll make them pay for every step they take." The tension was palpable as they prepared for the final stand. Outside, the hum of the alien machinery grew louder, closer. Sarah could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, sharpening her senses. "We're not done yet," she muttered under her breath, tightening her grip on her rifle. "Not by a long shot." The door shook as the Marauders tried to force their way in, the wood splintering under the pressure. Elena finished setting the charges and scrambled back, giving Sarah a nod. "Ready." "Hold steady," Sarah said quietly, her eyes fixed on the door. "Wait for my mark." The door buckled, and with a deafening crash, it flew open. The first Marauders charged through, and Sarah's voice rang out clear and steady. "Now!" Elena detonated the charges, and the building shook with the force of the explosion. The Marauders were thrown back, their advance halted. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, through the dust and smoke, the Marauders began to move again, more cautiously this time. Sarah could see their determination, their refusal to be beaten. But she could also see something else, uncertainty. They were beginning to realize that this fight wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. And as long as there was doubt in their minds, Sarah knew they had a chance. "Get ready," she whispered, raising her rifle once more. "This is where we hold the line." The building shook again, dust falling from the rafters as the Marauders' assault continued. The door was little more than twisted metal now, half hanging on its hinges. Through the gaps, Sarah could see the dark, hulking forms of the aliens preparing for another charge. Each second felt like an eternity as she waited for them to make their move. "Stay sharp," she whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her team was positioned just as planned, Jackson on the stairs with his shotgun primed, Elena crouched behind an overturned desk, her fingers hovering over another set of improvised explosives, and Marcus at the window, his rifle trained on the door. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath drawn shallow to avoid giving away their positions. Outside, the sounds of the Marauders' heavy boots on concrete and the hum of their equipment filled the silence. The tension was palpable, a taut wire ready to snap. "Any second now," Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, his gaze never wavering from the door. Then, with a loud, guttural command from outside, the Marauders launched their next assault. The door was thrown open with a thunderous crash, and they poured in, their weapons raised. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Fire!" she shouted, and the room erupted into chaos. Jackson unleashed a barrage of shotgun blasts, the sound deafening in the confined space. Each shot was precise, aimed to maximize the damage to the Marauders' armor and shields. Elena triggered the explosives, a controlled detonation that sent a shockwave through the room, forcing the Marauders to stagger back. Marcus's shots were methodical, each one finding its mark with unerring accuracy. The Marauders, caught off guard by the intensity of the resistance, faltered. For a brief moment, it seemed they might fall back. But then their commander, a towering figure in dark, segmented armor, barked another order, and they regrouped, pushing forward with renewed determination. "They're not giving up!" Jackson yelled over the din, reloading his shotgun with a swift, practiced motion. "What's the plan, Cap?" Sarah's mind raced. They couldn't hold this position forever. The Marauders were too many, too relentless. They needed to change tactics, fast. Her eyes darted to the old service elevator at the back of the room, its gate half open, the shaft leading down into the depths of the building. An idea formed. "We're falling back," she decided, her voice firm. "Down the elevator shaft. It'll buy us some time and give us a chance to regroup. Jackson, cover us. Elena, Marcus, go first." Elena didn't need to be told twice. She was up and moving, Marcus close behind. Jackson nodded, stepping up to take their place at the front, his shotgun ready to cover the retreat. Sarah waited until Elena and Marcus were in the shaft before she turned to Jackson. "Your turn. I've got you covered." Jackson hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes searching hers, then he nodded. "Stay safe, Cap," he muttered before ducking down and sliding into the elevator shaft. Sarah fired a few more shots, then grabbed the rope and descended after them, the darkness swallowing her whole. The shaft was cramped and cold, every movement echoing off the metal walls. She could hear the sounds of the Marauders above, their confusion evident as they realized their prey had vanished. They reached the bottom, landing in a narrow, dimly lit corridor that stretched out into the unknown. Elena was already there, working to seal the hatch above them with whatever debris she could find. Marcus had his rifle up, covering the corridor ahead. "We need to keep moving," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "They'll figure out where we went soon enough." They moved quickly, the corridor twisting and turning, taking them deeper into the heart of the building. The air grew colder, the walls closing in around them. The only light came from the flickering emergency lamps mounted sporadically along the ceiling. Every step echoed, the sound amplified by the narrow confines. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, trying to anticipate the Marauders' next move. They had the advantage for now, but it wouldn't last. The Marauders were relentless, and their technology gave them an edge in tracking. They came to a fork in the corridor, and Sarah made a quick decision. "Left," she ordered, leading them down the narrower path. It was a gamble, but the tighter space would make it harder for the Marauders to advance in numbers. As they moved, Elena spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. "Cap, I've been thinking. There might be another way out of this. If we can get to the maintenance tunnels under the city, we could lose them for good. Those tunnels are a maze. If they don't know the layout, they'll be at a disadvantage." Sarah nodded, considering the plan. It was risky, but so was staying put. "Good idea. Let's head for the tunnels. We'll split up when we get there, create multiple trails for them to follow. That should slow them down." They pressed on, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the floor. The air grew damp and musty, the smell of mold and decay filling their nostrils. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, the weight of the earth above pressing down on them. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a rusted metal door. Elena worked quickly, her nimble fingers prying the lock open with a makeshift tool. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing the dark expanse of the maintenance tunnels beyond. "Everyone in," Sarah ordered, ushering them through. She took one last look back down the corridor, listening for any sign of pursuit, then slipped through the door, closing it behind her. Inside the tunnel, the darkness was absolute. Sarah flicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the black. "All right, this is where we split," she said, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. "Elena, you head east. Marcus, take the north tunnel. Jackson, you're with me. Keep your radios on a closed channel. We regroup at the old subway platform if things go south." The team nodded, each one silently acknowledging the risks. Without another word, they dispersed, slipping into the darkness, their footsteps fading into the distance. Sarah and Jackson moved quickly, the sound of their breaths and footsteps the only noise in the tunnel. The silence was unnerving, every shadow a potential threat. Sarah kept her flashlight low, the beam just enough to see by, her senses on high alert. "Do you think they'll follow us down here?" Jackson asked quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "They will," Sarah replied, her tone grim. "But they won't find us easily. We have the advantage down here." They continued on, deeper into the maze of tunnels, each step taking them further from the safety of the surface. Sarah knew this was their best chance, but she also knew it was far from a guarantee. The Marauders were relentless, and their resources were vast. But so was their resolve. As long as they kept moving, kept fighting, they still had a chance. And for Sarah, that was enough. Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber, the old subway platform Elena had mentioned. It was abandoned, long forgotten by the world above, a relic of a time before the invasion. Sarah and Jackson stepped out onto the platform, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The air was thick with dust, each breath feeling heavy and raw in Sarah's lungs. The distant echo of footsteps reverberated through the abandoned subway platform, creating a symphony of uncertainty. She kept her flashlight low, its beam just a thin slice of light cutting through the darkness, and her senses sharp. Each shadow seemed to move with a life of its own, but Sarah knew it was just her mind playing tricks. Beside her, Jackson moved with a quiet efficiency, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. "What's our next move, Cap?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant rumble of what might have been collapsing debris or, worse, the Marauders' relentless advance. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her shoulders. The tunnels were a temporary reprieve, but not a solution. "We need to draw them in," she finally said, her voice calm despite the tension coiled in her muscles. "If we can trap them down here, we can make this a final stand. Use their numbers against them." Jackson nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "Divide and conquer, then?" "Exactly. They think they have us cornered. Let's use that to our advantage." She tightened her grip on her rifle, feeling the familiar coolness of the metal. "We make a lot of noise, lead them into a choke point. Elena's rigged a few surprises in the eastern tunnels. If we can get them there, they'll be walking right into it." Jackson allowed himself a grim smile. "Always did like fireworks." The two moved forward with renewed purpose, their steps measured and deliberate. Every sound seemed amplified in the underground expanse, the faintest shuffle of gravel underfoot echoing like a thunderclap. They needed to act fast, but every movement had to be calculated, precise. They reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Sarah paused, glancing down each darkened path. "Here's where we split," she said, her decision swift. "I'll take the left tunnel and make some noise. You head right and loop back around. Keep your radio close, but stay quiet unless absolutely necessary." Jackson gave a curt nod. "Stay safe, Cap. I'll see you on the other side." Sarah watched him disappear into the shadows, then turned her focus to her own path. She moved with purpose, her boots barely making a sound against the gritty floor. She needed to find the right spot to draw the Marauders in, a place where the tunnels narrowed, forcing them into a bottleneck. She could hear them now, the faint mechanical whir of their armor echoing through the subterranean labyrinth. They were getting closer, methodically sweeping the area, trying to flush out their quarry. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Fear would only slow her down. Reaching a narrow passage, she positioned herself just inside the entrance, her back against the cold, damp wall. She checked her rifle, ensuring it was ready, and then deliberately knocked a loose pipe against the stone. The clang echoed loudly, a sudden, jarring sound that would undoubtedly draw attention. Moments later, she could hear the Marauders changing course, their heavy steps now heading directly for her position. Sarah waited, counting down in her head. 5, 4, 3. Here they come, she whispered into her radio, her voice barely above a breath. She could hear Jackson on the other end, his silence an acknowledgement. The Marauders rounded the corner, their silhouettes imposing in the darkness. Sarah waited until they were fully in the passage before opening fire. The first few rounds were aimed at the front line, the concussive force driving them back momentarily. It wasn't meant to defeat them, just to lure them further in. She continued to fire in controlled bursts, retreating deeper into the tunnel. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the space becoming tighter. Just a little further, she thought, keeping her pace steady. As she reached the bend where the tunnel split again, she heard the unmistakable sound of an explosion from somewhere ahead. Elena's trap had been triggered. Sarah smiled to herself, adrenaline surging. The plan was working. Now she just had to keep them coming. She ducked around the corner, pausing to catch her breath. The Marauders were relentless, driven by a mix of anger and confusion. They didn't understand how these humans, so seemingly primitive, were managing to hold their own. But Sarah knew the answer. They were fighting for their home, for their very survival. She could hear them regrouping, preparing for another push. "Jackson, how's it looking on your end?" she whispered into her radio. "Almost there," came his reply, his voice tense but steady. "Just keep them coming your way a little longer." "Roger that." Sarah peered around the corner, taking a quick count of the Marauders. They were advancing again, slower this time, more cautiously. They were learning, adapting, but it wouldn't be enough. She fired another burst, hitting the walls to create a shower of sparks and debris, disorienting them. Then she moved again, leading them deeper into the trap. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind remained clear, focused. Each step, each shot, was a calculated move in this deadly game. The tunnel widened slightly, and Sarah saw the marker Elena had left, 3 scratches on the wall, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. This was it. She had to hold them here, just long enough. She ducked behind a pile of debris, switching her rifle to single-shot mode. Every shot counted now. The Marauders were closing in, their movements more coordinated. She could see their leader, a hulking figure with a visor that glowed faintly in the dark. "Now, Jackson!" she called into the radio, her voice carrying a note of urgency. A second explosion rocked the tunnel, this one much closer. The blast sent a shockwave through the narrow space, knocking several Marauders off their feet. The leader staggered but remained standing, his visor cracking from the force. Sarah didn't waste the opportunity. She stepped out from behind cover and aimed for the leader's weakened visor. The shot rang out, a single, precise bullet that found its mark. The glass shattered, and the leader fell, his body collapsing heavily to the ground. The remaining Marauders hesitated, their confidence shaken. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. "Push forward!" she yelled into her radio. "Now's our chance!" Jackson and Elena emerged from their positions, their weapons blazing. The Marauders, caught between the explosions and the sudden assault, were thrown into disarray. They fought back, but their formation was broken, their morale crumbling. In the chaos, Sarah felt a surge of hope. They were doing it, they were pushing them back. But she knew better than to let her guard down. The battle was far from over, and any mistake could be their last. She pressed forward, every step fueled by determination. The Marauders were retreating now, pulling back toward the tunnel entrance. Sarah didn't let up, driving them further back, her team by her side. As they neared the entrance, she saw a glimmer of light, a sign they were close to the surface. "Keep going," she urged, her voice strong. "We've got them on the run." With one final push, they forced the Marauders out of the tunnel and into the open air. The bright light of the morning sun was almost blinding after the darkness of the tunnels, but Sarah didn't stop. She kept moving, kept fighting, until the last of the Marauders had retreated, disappearing into the horizon. Breathing heavily, she lowered her rifle, her eyes scanning the area for any remaining threats. But there were none. They had done it. They had driven them back, at least for now. Jackson came up beside her, his face a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Hell of a fight, Cap," he said, his voice rough but full of admiration. Sarah nodded, her chest heaving with each breath. "Yeah," she replied, a small smile forming on her lips. "But this isn't over. They'll be back. And when they come, we'll be ready." Elena and Marcus joined them, their expressions equally weary yet resolute. They had won a battle, but the war was still ahead. For now, they had a moment of peace. But Sarah knew it wouldn't last. The Marauders would return, and they need to be ready for whatever came next. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the city, Sarah felt a spark of determination reignite within her. They had shown the Marauders that Earth wasn't an easy target. And they would continue to fight, no matter the cost. "We regroup," she said, turning to face her team. "We rebuild. And we keep fighting." The others nodded, their resolve mirroring her own. They had faced the darkness and come out stronger. And together, they would face whatever lay ahead.